Psalm 5. God shields your steps. Every wicked plan scatters before you walk. When David wrote Psalm 5, he was not sitting on a throne of victory, but kneeling in the shadow of opposition. The psalm opens with a voice crying out to God in the morning, pleading to be heard, to be guided, and to be shielded from the schemes of the wicked. It is not a song of comfort sung from safety. It is a battle hymn of faith, sung from the edge of danger. Psalm 5 is the sound of a heart that refuses to fear, even when evil surrounds. It is the declaration of one who knows that as long as he walks in the counsel of God, no plan of darkness can prevail against him. In these verses, David reveals a principle that still governs the spiritual life of every believer today. When God shields your steps, no weapon formed against you can stand. Every scheme that the enemy crafts in secret will scatter before your obedience. Every trap set by deceitful tongues will fail before your integrity. Every curse spoken against your destiny will dissolve before your worship. Psalm 5 is more than ancient poetry. It is divine strategy. It teaches us how to walk through a corrupt world without being corrupted, how to stand firm when deceit surrounds us, and how to let the righteousness of God become the invisible armor that turns back every attack. The psalm begins with an intimate plea. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation. Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King and my God. For unto thee will I pray. Why? It's a reminder that protection begins not with human defense, but with divine attention. David doesn't begin by asking for vengeance. He begins by asking to be heard. This shows the heart of a man who knows that real security is not in avoiding battle, but in walking with God through it. From the early morning of his prayer to the assurance at the psalm's end, David teaches that when you walk uprightly before God, your steps become sacred ground. No wickedness can root itself where holiness walks. Evil plans lose their power in the light of divine guidance. The psalm does not deny the presence of wickedness. It proclaims its defeat before divine order. As you journey through this reflection, you will see how every line of Psalm 5 is a spiritual weapon. It arms your soul with discernment, steadies your mind with truth, and fills your heart with the confidence that God is not a passive observer of your struggles. He is an active shield before you, scattering every plan of darkness before your feet touch the path, the morning cry that moves heaven. There is a sacred moment in every believer's life when the night finally breaks into prayer. Before the world awakes, before voices fill the air, the soul whispers its first words to God. Psalm 5 begins in that hour. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly. This morning cry is not simply about time, it is about posture. It is the declaration that before you face man, you must face God. Before you enter the world, you must enter his presence. David's morning prayer sets the tone for spiritual warfare. He understands that the day ahead is not neutral. There will be deceit, temptation, arrogance, and malice, forces that aim to shake his steps. So he begins his day by surrendering it. I lay my requests before you, he says. The Hebrew imagery here suggests the act of arranging something carefully upon an altar. It is as if David is saying, I am laying every thought, every fear, every decision, and every enemy before you, Lord. I will not move until you have set my direction. This is the foundation of divine protection, submission. The flesh wants to fight first and pray later. The Spirit knows that victory begins in stillness. When a believer prays before walking, God walks before the believer. Every path is altered, every danger is seen, and every unseen trap loses its surprise. Notice the expectation in David's words, and wait expectantly. He does not pray and then despair. He does not pray and then assume silence means abandonment. He prays and watches. Expectancy is faith in motion. It means you believe God not only heard you, but is already arranging things ahead of you. The wicked may have plans, but God is reordering their steps, even as you pray. Many people begin their days reacting instead of aligning. They open messages before opening the Word. They face anxiety before facing their Father. And then they wonder why confusion rules their hours. Psalm 5 is the remedy for that imbalance. It calls you to meet your Creator before your conflicts. It teaches that when your first word is to heaven, your last word will not be defeat. David does not beg in fear. He speaks as one who knows his king listens. Give ear to my words, O Lord. He addresses God as king, not as a distant ruler, but as his personal defender. There is humility and confidence woven together. Humility because he knows his dependence, confidence because he knows God's covenant. This is the rhythm of true prayer, reverence and assurance dancing together in faith. The wicked begin their day scheming, plotting, or pretending. The righteous begin their day surrendering. The difference between the two is not circumstance, but alignment. The wicked trust in their manipulation, the righteous trust in divine orchestration. And here lies the secret of scattered plans. God does not need to destroy your enemies with storms or fire. He simply redirects your path so that their traps collapse without you ever stepping into them. There are mornings when you wake up and sense heaviness, resistance, or dread without reason. That is not random. It is often the whisper of a spiritual battle forming around you. But when you take those first minutes to call upon God, something unseen shifts. The plans being woven against you begin to unravel. The confusion meant for your mind returns to the enemy's camp. The darkness that hoped to meet you on the road loses its coordinates. David teaches that divine protection is proactive. He doesn't wait for trouble to come. He builds a wall of worship before it arrives. He positions his heart in holiness so that evil cannot claim him later. This is not superstition, it is spiritual intelligence. To rise early and consecrate the day is to say, I will not walk into the unknown alone. When God shields your steps, it is not a passive covering. It is an active surrounding. It means every path you take is escorted by grace. Every place you go is preceded by divine inspection. Every word meant to harm you loses its edge before it reaches your ear. That is the mystery of Psalm 5. Evil plans scatter not because you see them, but because God sees them first. And yet, for this shield to remain, the heart must remain pure. David says later, You are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness. Evil cannot dwell with you. This means you cannot expect divine defense while walking in deliberate disobedience. The shield is maintained by holiness. God defends those who reflect his righteousness. He surrounds the upright with favor as a shield, not as decoration, but as divine armor. There is a profound truth hidden in these verses. When you walk in purity, God himself becomes your perimeter. The righteous are not untouchable because they are powerful. They are untouchable because they are positioned. When you live inside the will of God, every arrow aimed at you must first pierce his permission, and none can. That is why the psalmist says, Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. David doesn't ask God to destroy his enemies first. He asks to be guided correctly, because he knows that if he walks rightly, the enemy's wrongs will undo themselves. When God makes your way straight, deceit cannot find purchase. Lies fall flat against truth. Manipulation exhausts itself in confusion. You do not need to fight every rumor, every whisper, or every plot. You only need to keep walking in righteousness. Every wicked plan scatters when faced with divine order. Sometimes protection does not look like thunder. It looks like peace. It looks like moving through chaos untouched. It looks like seeing the enemy fail without ever raising your voice. It looks like walking through traps that never activate because your obedience changed the terrain. That is what happens when God shields your steps. The shield of God is not made of metal, it is made of mercy. It is the barrier of grace that refuses to let condemnation overtake you. It is the wall of righteousness that blocks every accusation. It is the fire of presence that consumes every curse, and it is renewed every morning when you pray, when you submit, when you align. David ends this section with assurance, "But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy, because thou defendest them." That joy is not denial, it is discernment. It is knowing that while the enemy plots, God protects. It is the sound of a soul so covered by divine favor that no slander, betrayal, or curse can shake its ground. So begin your mornings as David did, not with anxiety, but with alignment, not with worry, but with worship, because when you do, heaven begins to scatter what hell tried to organize. Every wicked plan loses power before your steps touch the ground. And as you move forward, shielded by divine favor, you will learn that no scheme formed against the obedient can endure the morning light of God's presence. If this word spoke to your spirit, remember, subscribe to the channel, because this is only the beginning of the journey through the power of the Psalms, where faith becomes your armor and truth your path. There is a moment in every believer's journey when the storms outside begin to mirror the turmoil within, when the noise of the world becomes so loud that it is hard to discern the whisper of God. It is in such seasons that Psalm 5 takes on its deepest meaning, for it does not only describe protection from the wicked, but also the inner sanctification that makes that protection possible. When David declares that God does not delight in wickedness and that evil cannot dwell with him, he is not merely describing God's character, he is revealing the secret of divine companionship. To walk in God's protection, one must walk in his presence. And to walk in his presence, one must learn to dwell in holiness. The shield of God surrounds not the careless, but the consecrated. The greatest misunderstanding many people have about spiritual warfare is that they assume it begins with external attacks, with visible enemies and clear opposition, but the war almost always begins within. The flesh wars against the spirit, pride wars against humility, and compromise whispers against conviction. Before any wicked plan from the outside can reach you, it must first find agreement on the inside. That is why the psalmist begins by examining the heart before addressing the enemy. He knows that if his heart remains clean, the enemy's words cannot cling. When the temple within is guarded, the schemes without are scattered. God shields your steps not only by blocking danger, but by refining direction. Every act of obedience becomes a wall. Every choice of righteousness becomes a weapon. When you choose silence over slander, patience over panic, purity over pleasure, you are building invisible defenses around your life. The righteous are not immune from attack, they are simply inaccessible to destruction. The storm may surround them, but it cannot sink them, because integrity is their ark. David understood this truth deeply because his enemies were not always foreign invaders. Sometimes they were people he loved, people he had trusted, people who spoke his name, but not his truth. Betrayal was a companion in his life, yet even in that, he learned that God's shield is not meant to prevent pain, but to preserve purpose. The plans of the wicked can wound, but they cannot win. They may bruise the flesh, but they cannot touch the destiny of one hidden in God. The verse that follows in Psalm 5, "The foolish shall not stand in your sight, you hate all workers of iniquity," reveals something critical about divine order. God's protection is not random, it is moral. His shield is not a charm, it is a covenant. The fool cannot stand in his sight because arrogance refuses alignment. The wicked cannot dwell near him because corruption dissolves in his light. Therefore, the safest place in the universe is not a fortress of stone or a network of allies. It is the presence of God Himself. When your life is rooted in His righteousness, no evil can coexist around you for long. It will either flee, repent, or collapse under its own deceit. There is power in purity that the world does not understand. Purity is not weakness, it is resistance. It is the quiet refusal to be bought, broken, or bent by evil. It is the unseen discipline that turns back unseen enemies. When your motives are clean, God becomes your advocate. When your words are true, heaven bears witness on your behalf. When your heart is pure, every false accusation eventually condemns itself. That is why the wicked ultimately scatter. They cannot stand before one who walks in truth, because truth itself is God's environment. To dwell in that environment requires discipline. The flesh does not want to live there. It wants comfort, applause, revenge, justification, but holiness demands surrender. It requires you to leave the world's weapons behind and fight only with faith. David was a warrior, yet he knew that some battles are won not by the sword but by silence. Some victories come not from conquering others, but from conquering self. To master the flesh is to disarm the enemy. The devil cannot use what you refuse to hold. When you choose to remain righteous in a world that rewards rebellion, you become an offense to darkness. You are a walking contradiction to the spirit of this age, and for that reason attacks will come. But they cannot endure, because God Himself upholds the righteous. You will destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. Notice that David does not say he will destroy them. He says, "You will." The responsibility of justice belongs to God. The believer's task is to remain blameless while God handles vengeance. This is where many stumble. They see deceit prosper and think silence is weakness. They hear lies spread and feel compelled to defend their name. But the wisdom of Psalm 5 is that silence under God's guidance is not surrender. It is strategy. To react in the flesh is to leave the shield of the Spirit. To answer every accusation is to step down to the level of those who dwell in deceit. But to remain still and righteous is to let God's truth rise like the morning sun, dispersing shadows without argument. When God shields your steps, vindication comes not from debate, but from endurance. The false words spoken against you may echo for a while, but time itself becomes your ally, for truth does not age. The schemes designed in darkness rot under exposure. Lies are temporary weapons. They dissolve where integrity remains. Every wicked plan eventually scatters because deceit cannot sustain itself in the presence of divine light. The psalm then shifts from destruction to direction. But as for me, I will come into your house in the multitude of your mercy, and in your fear will I worship toward your holy temple. This is the pivot point between despair and deliverance. David knows that safety is found not in escaping the enemy, but in entering the presence of mercy. He contrasts the arrogance of the wicked with the humility of worship. The wicked try to build walls through control. The righteous build altars through surrender. The wicked boast of strength. The righteous kneel in awe. When you live in worship, you live under covering. Worship is not a song. It is surrender in motion. It is the alignment of your spirit with divine order. It is the confession that God is greater than your fears, wiser than your enemies, and closer than your doubts. To worship toward His holy temple is to fix your eyes on the one who cannot be moved. And when your focus remains on Him, no enemy can redirect your path. Mercy is not weakness, it is armor. When you rely on the mercy of God, you disarm the accusations of the enemy. Satan thrives on guilt and condemnation, but mercy silences his court. That is why David says, "In the multitude of your mercy." He is not relying on his own record, but on God's compassion. To walk in mercy is to walk covered by divine patience, to move in the assurance that your mistakes no longer define your direction. The wicked are bound to the weight of their sin. The righteous are liberated by forgiveness. It is here that the psalm takes on its prophetic tone. David's words become the pattern of Christ himself, who faced deceit, hatred, and false accusation, yet never left the path of righteousness. He walked in perfect obedience, and because of that, every scheme against him became the seed of salvation. The cross was meant to scatter him, but instead it scattered the powers of darkness. That is the ultimate fulfillment of Psalm 5. When you walk in righteousness, what the enemy intends for destruction becomes the very instrument of divine victory. Every believer who follows that pattern partakes in the same mystery. When you choose forgiveness over vengeance, patience over panic, humility over pride, you allow God to fight for you. You turn the battlefield into holy ground. Every plan that was meant to trap you turns into testimony. Every betrayal becomes a bridge. Every loss becomes a lesson. Because God's shield does not merely block arrows, it transforms them. The phrase, "Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness," is not a passive request. It is a daily surrender. To be led by righteousness means to relinquish control. It means you no longer dictate your path, but allow God's wisdom to direct every step. The human heart often seeks shortcuts, but divine guidance requires endurance. Righteous paths are not always the fastest, they are the safest. They do not always please the flesh, they purify the soul. When God leads you, He sometimes takes you through valleys to humble you, through deserts to strengthen you, through silence to sharpen your hearing. The journey is not punishment, it is preparation. Every delay refines dependence. Every detour dismantles pride. Every disappointment deepens discernment. And when at last you stand where God has destined, you will see that every step was shielded, even the painful ones. The wicked cannot comprehend this kind of journey because they walk by impulse, not instruction. They plot without prayer. They move without counsel. They speak without truth. That is why their paths always collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. David describes them vividly. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue. The image is haunting. A grave disguised as a voice. Their words carry death, not life. They speak to deceive, not to build. But while deceit may impress for a moment, it cannot endure. Every open sepulchre eventually reveals its stench. In contrast, the voice of the righteous carries life. It speaks blessing even under pressure. It tells truth even when silence would be safer. It intercedes instead of accusing. The righteous tongue builds bridges where others build traps. That is why God delights in the prayers of the upright, because their words align with His nature. Prayer is not merely speaking to God, it is speaking with His Spirit. It is echoing His heart on earth. As you learn to guard your words, you will find that God guards your way. Speech and steps are deeply connected. Those who speak corruption walk into confusion. Those who speak truth walk into clarity. The mouth reveals the map of the heart, and the map determines the direction of destiny. That is why David prays not only for protection, but for purity of speech. He knows that if his voice remains aligned with heaven, his path will remain shielded on earth. There are seasons when silence itself becomes the greatest act of faith. When the noise of false accusation surrounds you, when every attempt to explain yourself only fuels misunderstanding, that is the moment to stand still and let God speak in His own time. Vindication delayed is not vindication denied. It is divine timing preserving the greater revelation. When the truth finally surfaces, it will not just clear your name, it will glorify His. The most powerful people in the kingdom are not those who fight the loudest, but those who trust the deepest. They have learned that peace is greater than proof. They no longer waste energy trying to convince others of their righteousness because they know that time and truth are allies of the pure. Their focus is fixed on walking rightly, not being seen rightly. And because of that, they remain unshaken even when surrounded. When God shields your steps, He also shields your silence. He ensures that while others speak against you, your peace itself becomes a testimony. Every word of slander becomes evidence of your endurance. Every false witness becomes a stage for divine intervention. You do not need to retaliate. You only need to remain righteous, for the Lord Himself will make your integrity shine like the dawn. To live in this assurance is to walk above fear. You begin to understand that even when the wicked plot, their plans are limited by God's permission. They can only move as far as His purpose allows. The believer who understands this truth no longer panics in the face of opposition. Instead, they discern what God is teaching through it. Opposition becomes revelation, resistance becomes refinement, and when the lesson is learned, the attack loses its assignment. Every trial becomes a teacher. Every setback becomes sacred ground. Every heartbreak becomes holy instruction. And as you grow through these divine lessons, you begin to see that the greatest shield is not what God keeps from you, but what He builds within you. The inner strength forged in prayer, patience, and purity becomes a fortress no enemy can breach. The closing verses of the psalm echo with this revelation. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround him as with a shield. Notice the order. Blessing follows righteousness, and favor follows obedience. You do not chase favor, you cultivate faithfulness. Favor is the atmosphere of a life rightly aligned. It is the invisible fragrance that attracts divine opportunities and repels demonic interference. When you walk uprightly, doors open without striving, and traps close without warning. That is what it means to be surrounded by divine favor. It is not occasional luck, it is continual covering. There are moments in life when you will sense this shield tangibly, when situations that should have destroyed you simply dissolve. When accusations fall silent without your effort, when harm turns to help and confusion turns to clarity. That is the evidence of favor at work. God's shield does not always make sense logically, but it manifests unmistakably. You will walk through fire and not smell of smoke. You will stand in storms and remain unshaken. You will face betrayal and still carry peace. That is not coincidence. That is covenant. The world calls it resilience. Heaven calls it grace. Grace is what holds you when logic cannot. Grace is the invisible hand redirecting arrows mid-flight. Grace is the divine shield between what should have happened and what actually did. And when you live aware of that grace, fear loses its grip. You realize that no wicked plan can overtake one walking in mercy, because mercy is always one step ahead. In the end, Psalm 5 is not merely a psalm of defense, but of destiny. It does not promise that the righteous will never face wickedness. It promises that wickedness will never determine their end. Every plan of deceit eventually implodes under the weight of divine truth. Every act of treachery becomes testimony to God's sustaining power. Every enemy that rises becomes an instrument of revelation, proving once more that God's shield is unbreakable. To live in the revelation of Psalm 5 is to move without fear, to pray without panic, and to trust without proof. It is to wake each morning knowing that though you may walk through a field of hidden traps, your steps are ordered, your path is sanctified, and your future is secure. Evil may watch, but it cannot win. Deceit may whisper, but it cannot rewrite what God has spoken. The one who walks in righteousness walks under the constant escort of divine favor. And so, as David closes his prayer with rejoicing, you too are called to live in that joy. The joy of knowing that your defender is not distant. The joy of walking through a fallen world with unshaken faith. The joy of being shielded not because you are perfect, but because you are His. The joy of realizing that every wicked plan has already been scattered before you even began to walk. If these words strengthened your spirit today, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. Each message here is meant to guide you deeper into the wisdom of the Psalms and the power of divine protection. Walk with us in faith, and let every new revelation remind you that when God shields your steps, you never walk alone. There comes a point in the walk of faith when protection is no longer something you simply ask for, but something you begin to live inside of. It ceases to be an occasional divine intervention and becomes an atmosphere, a constant presence surrounding every step you take. Psalm 5 reveals this deeper dimension of divine shielding. It is not just a prayer for defense, but an awakening into a life aligned with the will of God, where your very movement carries His light and your obedience becomes the signal that sends confusion into the enemy's camp. The believer who reaches this stage no longer sees protection as God chasing after his trouble, but as God walking before him, shaping the terrain, disarming what was meant to harm, and scattering what was meant to stand in opposition. When David prayed, "Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies, make your way straight before my face," he revealed that the greatest protection is direction. The straight path is not merely safe because it is smooth. It is safe because it is divine. God does not promise to remove enemies. He promises to make their strategies powerless by guiding your steps through His plan. Every act of obedience is an act of warfare. Every time you choose God's way over your own, you are walking past a trap that was designed to destroy you. The world around you may look chaotic, but when God is leading you, even chaos serves your destiny. The crooked schemes of others become the very paths through which you rise. The betrayals, the rejections, the false judgments all become stepping stones when your trust is not in vindication, but in divine orchestration. David could sing Psalm 5 because he had learned this truth in pain. He had seen friends turn to foes, counselors become conspirators, and comfort turn to exile. Yet through it all, he discovered that as long as he stayed in step with God, none of it could derail what heaven had designed. God's shield does not simply stop arrows, it reroutes destinies. When you walk in alignment with the Spirit, everything that was sent to stop you ends up serving you. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned unjustly. But in every place where evil seemed to prevail, God was actually positioning him for purpose. The plans of the wicked scattered before he even saw them. He did not escape betrayal. He transcended it. That is what Psalm 5 is about, not the absence of trouble, but the triumph of divine purpose in the midst of it. It is easy to think of protection only in terms of physical or visible defense, yet the greatest shields are unseen. The thoughts God prevents from entering your mind, the relationships He ends before they can corrupt you, the opportunities He closes because they were traps in disguise. The unseen mercy of God is often the most powerful form of deliverance. When He blocks your plans, He may be saving your soul. When He silences your enemies, He may be teaching your spirit. When He delays your answer, He may be developing your endurance. In all these things, the wicked plans of the enemy scatter, not by noise or spectacle, but by quiet divine redirection. The flesh resists this kind of protection because it demands visible proof. It wants to see enemies fall, to hear apologies, to receive public vindication. But the Spirit knows that the truest vindication is peace. The real sign that God has shielded you is not that your enemies suffer, but that you remain unshaken. While they are consumed by their own deceit, you are carried by divine serenity. To live untroubled in the midst of turmoil is the most powerful evidence of being under divine favor. There is a line in the psalm that echoes this truth profoundly, "But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy, because thou defendest them." Joy becomes a weapon in the hands of the righteous. It is the sound that confuses the enemy. It is the evidence that your peace is not circumstantial, but supernatural. When you rejoice under pressure, You are declaring that evil has lost its power to manipulate your mood. Every time you praise while being opposed, you are scattering the plans of the enemy without even engaging him directly. David's life was full of moments where joy became his defense. When Saul hunted him through caves, he sang. When his own son rose against him, he prayed. When his friends doubted him, he wrote psalms. Each act of worship became an act of war. The enemy cannot occupy a heart filled with praise. Demons flee where joy dwells, because joy is the echo of trust. It says to heaven and hell alike that no matter what unfolds, the Lord remains in control. Psalm 5 is, in that sense, not just about divine defense, but divine dwelling. It invites you to make your life a sanctuary. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround him as with a shield. Notice that the shield is circular, surrounding, not one-sided. This means that the protection of God is complete. It covers not only what you see ahead, but what you cannot see behind. It guards not only your physical path, but your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, and your destiny. Many people pray for protection only when they feel attacked. But David's revelation goes further. He shows that righteousness itself is the structure of protection. To live rightly before God is to live surrounded by Him. Holiness is not a restriction. It is a refuge. It does not confine you. It covers you. The pure in heart are protected not because they avoid danger, but because they dwell in divine light. Darkness cannot claim what light already fills. This is why sin always invites vulnerability. It is not merely a moral failure. It is an opening in your armor. When the heart tolerates deceit, the shield weakens. When the tongue joins gossip, the shield thins. When the eyes linger on what corrupts, the shield cracks. The devil does not need permission to attack what is already exposed. That is why repentance is not shame. It is restoration. Every time you confess, you rebuild the wall. Every time you forgive, you seal a breach. Every time you choose humility over pride, the shield grows stronger. The mercy of God is the craftsman of your protection. He never despises the one who returns. The moment you come back in truth, He begins to surround you again. You may have walked through seasons where your disobedience left you open, but the very fact that you are reading this now is proof that grace has pursued you. Psalm 5 is a callback to that grace, an invitation to once again walk shielded, guided, and covered. Imagine what it means to walk through life aware of this shield. Every decision you make is preceded by divine inspection. Every encounter you have is filtered through divine wisdom. Every path you take has already been walked by God before you arrived. That is not poetic imagination, it is spiritual reality. The believer's journey is not solitary, it is supervised. God does not watch from afar, He walks within. That is why no weapon formed against you can prosper. It cannot penetrate the presence you carry. But there is a condition. The psalm makes it clear. You are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness. You cannot expect divine covering while living in deliberate rebellion. Holiness and hypocrisy cannot coexist under the same shield. The presence of God is not simply protective. It is purifying. When you draw near to Him, everything false in you begins to fade. You cannot stay close to holiness and remain hidden in sin. That is why some prayers seem unanswered. It is not because God is absent, but because He is waiting for alignment. Alignment is the secret of Psalm 5. David keeps returning to this posture. Lead me, O Lord. He is not demanding outcomes. He is asking for direction. The modern believer often prays for God to change circumstances, but David prays for God to change his steps. He knows that once his path is aligned, the circumstances will follow. The wicked may plot, but they cannot reach a man whose movement is dictated by heaven. When you let God lead, you begin to walk above confusion. The same situation that breaks others will refine you. The same betrayal that destroys others will mature you. The same storm that sinks others will teach you how to walk on water. Because when you are led by the Spirit, no opposition can define your outcome. Every attack simply becomes another stage for divine revelation. Consider how this principle unfolds throughout Scripture. Daniel was surrounded by corruption, jealousy, and political deceit, yet he remained untouched because his steps were ordered by prayer. His enemies plotted to trap him in his faith, but the very trap they set became their downfall. That is Psalm 5 in motion, every wicked plan scattering before the righteous walk. The lion's den was never a defeat. It was a demonstration. God does not remove danger, he disarms it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced a similar truth. The furnace was heated 7 times hotter, yet when they walked in righteousness, the fire lost its power. The shield of God did not prevent them from entering the flame. It prevented the flame from entering them. That is the depth of divine defense. It does not always change the environment. It changes what the environment can do to you. Job lived this revelation in anguish. Satan could touch his possessions, his health, and even his relationships, but he could not touch his soul. That invisible barrier was Psalm 5 embodied. Even in his lowest hour, Job's trust in God scattered the plans of the wicked one. The fire of suffering refined his spirit, and when it was over, the same God who shielded his soul restored his life. All these examples converge on one truth. Divine shielding is not avoidance, it is transformation. It turns battles into blessings, suffering into sanctification, and opposition into opportunity. You are never merely being protected, you are being perfected. Every time the enemy plots, God prepares. Every time darkness gathers, God positions. Every time lies multiply, God magnifies the truth, and when the dust settles, his glory stands unchallenged. David's final words in Psalm 5 capture this perspective perfectly. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround him as with a shield. Blessing and favor are not rewards for effort, they are outcomes of alignment. When your life mirrors his righteousness, favor becomes the natural atmosphere around you. It is not occasional luck or coincidence. It is a divine ecosystem sustained by obedience. You begin to walk into opportunities you did not chase. You find doors opening that no human hand could unlock, and you see harm turning into help without your intervention. This is the mysterious economy of heaven. Righteousness attracts protection, obedience multiplies favor, and trust invites triumph. The longer you walk with God under this revelation, the less you fear the plans of men. You begin to understand that nothing truly evil can survive long around a righteous soul. The plans of the wicked are like shadows. They vanish when light remains constant. The only power darkness has is distraction. If the enemy cannot destroy you, he will try to disturb you. That is why peace is not a luxury, it is armor. A disturbed mind becomes an open gate, but a peaceful heart becomes an impenetrable fortress. To maintain that peace, you must learn to practice the same rhythm David lived by. Prayer in the morning, praise in adversity, purity in heart, patience in waiting. This rhythm keeps your shield intact. It renews your spiritual focus. It keeps you hidden in plain sight, walking through danger without fear. Many times you will not even realize what God has protected you from. The cancelled meeting that frustrated you, the delay that tested your patience, the closed door that disappointed you, all may have been divine interventions disguised as inconveniences. Heaven's shield often manifests as earthly redirection. Trust it. When God withholds, he protects. When he delays, he defends. When he says not yet, he is saying not this way. If you could see the number of traps that never triggered because of divine guidance, you would fall to your knees in gratitude. Every morning you wake up with breath in your lungs and peace in your mind. You are living evidence of 1,000 scattered plans. God's shield is not poetic, it is personal. It surrounds your family, your purpose, your identity, and your soul. Therefore, the call of Psalm 5 is not simply to ask for protection, but to become the kind of person who lives within it. The one who loves truth more than comfort, the one who values purity more than popularity, the one who walks in forgiveness even when wronged. These are the souls surrounded by divine fire, untouchable not because they are flawless, but because they are faithful. When you live this way, the enemy grows weary. Every scheme he launches returns void. Every slander he whispers evaporates in time. Every temptation loses its grip. Because the one thing hell cannot imitate is holiness. The devil can counterfeit power, influence, and even emotion, but he cannot reproduce purity. That is why God's shield is reserved for the upright, not because they are better, but because they reflect his image. So, if you have been weary of the battles, take heart. The psalm reminds you that the presence of enemies is not proof of God's absence, it is proof of your anointing. The wicked plan precisely because they sense what God is building through you. But every time you remain faithful, you turn their energy into evidence. Their hatred becomes the confirmation of your purpose. Their plots become the background for your testimony. Let your life become a living echo of David's faith. Rise in the morning and declare, "Lord, lead me in your righteousness." Refuse to step outside his will, no matter how tempting the shortcut. Guard your speech, keep your heart pure, and above all, rejoice. Rejoice even when you do not understand. Rejoice when things delay, when people betray, when paths twist, because joy is the language of the protected. It tells heaven you still trust, and it tells hell you still stand. As you walk under that shield, remember that the goal is not survival, but sanctification. You are not meant to simply endure the attacks. You are meant to emerge transformed by them. The same heat that burns straw refines gold. The same pressure that crushes stone creates diamonds. So let God use every opposition to expose strength you did not know you carried. And as you endure with integrity, you will see the ancient promise fulfilled, that the righteous are never forsaken, and their steps are forever ordered by the Lord. There is nothing more powerful than a soul completely surrendered. That is the posture Psalm 5 calls you to. When you surrender, you stop striving for control and start walking in confidence. You realize that your shield is not your effort, but his essence. You understand that no word spoken against you can override the word spoken for you. You recognize that every curse is cancelled in his covenant, every wound is healed in his will, and every step is sanctified in his spirit. And so, when you walk tomorrow, walk with awareness. Walk as one surrounded by invisible fire. Walk as one whose very breath confuses darkness. Walk as one who no longer fears what man can do, because your steps are choreographed by God. Every wicked plan will scatter, not because you fought harder, but because you walked holier. If these words reached your spirit and reminded you of the strength that surrounds you, take this moment to subscribe to the channel. Each message here will help you walk deeper in divine alignment, stronger in faith, and more aware of the shield that covers your life. Stay with us, and let every new word renew your confidence that when God shields your steps, no darkness can define your path. There comes a season in every believer's life when the shield of God is no longer a concept read from Scripture, but a reality that sustains the soul. It is not always the season of peace or prosperity. Often it is the season of pressure. Psalm 5 unfolds its deepest truth in that space between fear and faith, where the believer must learn that God's protection is not the absence of conflict but the presence of purpose. The wicked will plot, the deceitful will speak, the arrogant will rise, yet the one who walks under divine guidance will remain unmoved. because what surrounds him is stronger than what opposes him. David's life mirrors this spiritual tension. He was a man after God's own heart, yet he was constantly pursued by hatred. The anointing upon him attracted both favor and fury. This paradox is what many believers still face. The more you walk in purpose, the more you become a target of opposition. But the psalm teaches that such targeting is not tragedy. It is testimony. The enemy only attacks what carries power. The plans of darkness are drawn toward light, yet every time they approach, they scatter before the authority of righteousness. Psalm 5 reveals this divine pattern. The wicked plan, God redirects. The enemy plots, God protects. The flesh rises, the spirit prevails. The believer's safety is not in avoiding the battlefield, but in understanding who commands it. When God shields your steps, the terrain of warfare itself becomes the path of victory. Every snare laid for your feet becomes the ground for your testimony. Every false tongue raised against you becomes an instrument of your exaltation. When David prayed, "Make your way straight before my face," he was not asking God to remove obstacles. He was asking for clarity amidst them. The straight path is not always the easy one, but it is the righteous one. It is the path where deceit cannot manipulate you, where bitterness cannot blind you, and where fear cannot mislead you. It is the path where you walk, not by reaction, but by revelation. When God straightens your way, He does not eliminate the storm. He adjusts your steps so that the storm cannot sway you. To walk this path requires trust that transcends understanding. It means believing that even when the road bends, God is still directing it toward purpose. Sometimes He allows detours to deliver you from unseen traps. Sometimes He delays your progress to expose hidden enemies. Sometimes He closes doors because the room beyond them is poisoned. Divine protection is often disguised as divine postponement. The impatient heart interprets delay as denial, but the discerning heart knows it is design. The wicked do not understand this rhythm of grace. They rush to build, to manipulate, to secure advantage, believing that control equals strength. But their speed becomes their snare. In their haste to deceive, they forget that truth does not need urgency. Righteousness is never in a hurry because eternity is its ally. The wicked move like fire, loud, bright, and destructive, but righteousness moves like light, silent, steady, and eternal. Fire consumes what it touches, light transforms it, and in time, every false flame fades, while the light of truth continues to reveal what was hidden. That is why David could rest, even when surrounded. He understood that God's timing was his shield. Every second God delayed vengeance was another moment of refinement. The enemy's arrogance was not proof of victory, it was the prelude to his collapse. The schemes of evil are temporary by design. They cannot endure the weight of divine justice. For a while, they may seem successful, but like shadows at dawn, they dissolve the moment truth rises. When God shields your steps, He not only protects you from evil, He also protects you from becoming evil. There is a danger in responding to the wicked with their own weapons. When you fight deceit with deceit, you forfeit divine defense. When you meet arrogance with arrogance, you step outside the shield. The psalm reminds the believer that protection is not just external, it is internal. It is not only about being safe from others, but about being safe from yourself. The greatest threat to divine covering is compromise. Holiness is not optional armor, it is the very substance of the shield. You hate all workers of iniquity, David says, not with bitterness but with awareness. God's hatred here is not emotional rage, it is moral incompatibility. Evil cannot dwell with him because his nature repels it. Like oil and water, righteousness and wickedness cannot coexist. The righteous are shielded because they are surrounded by his likeness. The wicked fall because they resist his nature. Therefore, To remain under divine covering is to remain in divine character. Every act of forgiveness strengthens the wall. Every choice of humility thickens the barrier. Every moment of gratitude fortifies the defense. The believer who understands this no longer prays for protection as a reaction to fear, but as a rhythm of devotion. Morning by morning, David aligned his heart through prayer. In the morning I will direct my prayer unto you and look up. He knew that each day carried its own set of temptations and that spiritual focus must precede physical movement. The morning prayer was not ritual, it was recalibration. It was David resetting his inner compass toward the throne of God, ensuring that his first voice of the day belonged not to worry, not to memory, but to worship. Modern life often reverses this order. People wake to messages, deadlines, and distractions. Their minds are occupied before their spirits are awakened. They step into battle without armor and wonder why confusion follows. Psalm 5 calls the soul back to divine discipline. Begin your day in surrender, and the rest of it will unfold under command. The world may still resist you, but it cannot redirect you. Evil may still whisper, but it cannot deceive you. Because when the first sound you make is prayer, the next sound you hear is peace. God's protection is active in that moment. It does not simply wait for threats, it moves ahead of them. Before you enter a conversation, He has already adjusted your discernment. Before you face temptation, He has already prepared an escape. Before the enemy lays his trap, God has already redirected your steps. This is not wishful thinking. It is covenant truth. The same God who ordered the morning sun to rise orders the steps of the righteous. Nothing that happens in your day surprises Him, therefore nothing that happens can overpower you. To believe this requires a steady faith, not the faith of emotion, but the faith of endurance. Emotional faith thrives when the sun shines, but trembles when clouds gather. Enduring faith stands even when the sky is silent. David's faith was forged in silence. There were days when heaven seemed distant, when answers were delayed, when betrayal echoed louder than prayer. Yet even then he declared, "My King and my God, unto you will I pray." He understood that silence is not absence. It is sacred space. It is where God works unseen, scattering plans you do not yet know exist. Some of the greatest victories of your life will happen in silence. You will not hear the sound of the enemy falling, but you will feel the peace that follows. You will not witness the collapse of every deceit, but you will notice doors opening that no opposition could close. You will not always see the arrows diverted, but you will walk unharmed through what should have destroyed you. That is the mystery of divine defense. It does not always announce itself. It simply endures. In time, you begin to discern that God's protection is not random favor, but relational proximity. The closer you walk with Him, the stronger the shield becomes. Proximity produces perception. The more you dwell in His presence, the faster you recognize deception. Sin always thrives in distance. Holiness thrives in nearness. When your heart remains close to God, the enemy's voice loses volume. Temptation becomes recognizable for what it is, a counterfeit of intimacy, a distortion of truth. The wicked plan always begins as imitation. It mimics what is divine, but lacks the presence that gives it life. That is why David's focus was never on the enemy's activity, but on his own alignment. "Lead me in your righteousness because of my enemies," he prayed. In other words, let their presence remind me to stay closer to you. The opposition becomes motivation. The more deceit he faced, the more dependent he became. The more malice surrounded him, the more mercy he pursued. Every attack drove him deeper into worship. That is how the righteous win, not by retaliation, but by revelation. God often allows enemies not to destroy us, but to direct us. They become mirrors, reflecting what must be purified, catalysts revealing what must be strengthened. The presence of opposition exposes the necessity of divine presence. When the righteous are opposed, their response determines their reward. Bitterness delays blessing, but forgiveness accelerates it. Resentment builds walls, but gratitude builds wings. The moment you bless those who curse you, heaven takes notice and the shield strengthens. Every believer who walks in this revelation becomes untouchable in spirit. The enemy may still roar, but his roar loses power. Fear may still approach, but it no longer enters. You become like Daniel in the lion's den, surrounded by danger, yet untouched by it. The same presence that silenced lions still silences lies. The same favor that preserved Joseph in prison still preserves the righteous in confusion. The same hand that shielded David in exile still shields you in uncertainty. God's protection is not historical, it is eternal. When you begin to live aware of that, you no longer interpret attacks as random cruelty, but as divine choreography. Every enemy reveals another side of God's faithfulness. Every injustice reveals another depth of His justice. Every delay reveals another dimension of His timing. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start declaring, "What is this preparing in me?" The shift from complaint to comprehension marks the maturity of faith. It is the moment when you realize that your enemies are not obstacles, they are instruments. The psalm closes with a statement of triumph. You will bless the righteous. You will surround him with favor, as with a shield. Surround is a sacred word. It means there is no exposed side, no vulnerable angle, no unguarded entrance. The believer is completely encompassed. The shield is not static. It moves as you move. It bends where you bend. It covers where you step. It adjusts to your journey. The divine shield is alive because it is the presence of God Himself. You are not merely protected by Him, you are protected within Him. To live within that presence is to live beyond fear. Fear is the memory of pain projected into the future. Faith is the memory of promise projected into eternity. When faith dominates your memory, fear loses its narrative. The wicked may speak, but their words find no landing place. They speak lies, but truth surrounds you like an echo chamber of light. Every curse spoken against you returns empty. Every plot formed against your peace dissolves in the atmosphere of His favor. Even in the darkest valley, the shield remains. The valley does not prove God's absence, it proves His depth. Mountains show His majesty, but valleys show His intimacy. It is in the shadow that you learn the strength of His covering. It is there that faith becomes real, not as a doctrine, but as a dwelling. You begin to understand that protection is not just something God provides, it is something He is. He is not outside your battle cheering, He is inside it fighting. His Spirit stands between you and every arrow. His presence surrounds your thoughts when anxiety tries to invade. His peace guards your emotions when fear attempts to paralyze. And when the storm finally breaks, you will look back and realize that you were never in danger. You were in training. Every battle you faced was refining your ability to recognize His hand. Every wound you endured was deepening your dependence. Every night you cried was watering the soil of future strength. The enemy meant to exhaust you, but God used it to establish you. There will be days when you sense this shield more strongly than others. You will walk into rooms where hostility evaporates the moment you speak. You will face challenges that should overwhelm you but somehow dissolve before you're calm. You will stand where others fell and not understand why until you remember the psalm. You surround the righteous with favor as a shield. The favor of God is not only an opportunity, it is an endurance. It is what keeps you standing when logic says you should collapse. That is why gratitude is essential. To forget your protection is to weaken it. Gratitude renews awareness, and awareness sustains covering. Each time you thank God for unseen deliverance, the shield intensifies. Each time you acknowledge His hand, your atmosphere aligns with His authority. Gratitude is not emotion, it is armor. It is the language of those who know they are defended. As you walk forward in faith, remember this: the plans of the wicked are loud but limited. Their reach ends where righteousness begins. Their success ends where obedience stands. Their deception ends where discernment awakens. You are not a victim of circumstance, but a vessel of covenant. The same spirit that hovered over the chaos in Genesis now hovers over your life. What was void becomes full. What was formless takes shape. What was dark becomes day. The believer who truly grasps this truth no longer fears loss, rejection, or betrayal. He understands that no human hand can remove what God has sealed. People may walk away, but presence remains. Opportunities may close, but purpose continues. Enemies may rise, but destiny does not diminish. You walk not as one who hopes to be protected, but as one who already is. You no longer strive for security, you live from it, and when you reach that awareness, every wicked plan loses its meaning. The enemy can no longer intimidate a soul that has learned to rejoice in both battle and blessing. When your worship becomes louder than your worry, the war is already won. When your trust becomes deeper than your understanding, confusion no longer controls you. You are free, not because there is no danger, but because danger has lost dominion. So walk as David walked, confident yet humble, aware of threats yet anchored in truth. Let your prayer each morning be the same: lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness. Let that be the rhythm of your heart and the song of your soul, because as long as you walk in righteousness, every wicked plan will continue to scatter before your steps. They will crumble, not because you fight them, but because you follow Him. And when you feel weary, remember this promise: the shield is not something you carry, it is someone who carries you. The same God who guarded David guards you. The same Spirit that guided Christ guides you. The same grace that silenced accusers still surrounds you. You are not walking alone, you are walking encircled by eternity. If this message touched your heart and strengthened your faith, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Join this journey of reflection and revelation, where each word reminds you that the God who shields your steps will never leave you unguarded. Walk in peace, stay in His light, and let every wicked plan scatter before the presence that goes before you. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when faith must mature from mere belief into unwavering trust. It is the moment when the world's noise grows louder, when the promises of God seem delayed, when the path ahead is unclear, and when you must decide whether to walk by sight or by revelation. Psalm 5 leads us to that very threshold of faith. It teaches that the shield of God is not only a defense against external harm, but also a guide through internal conflict. It is both a covering and a compass, guarding the soul while directing it toward purpose. When David wrote these words, he was surrounded by betrayal, threatened by deceitful men, and pressed by circumstances that should have destroyed him. Yet, instead of collapsing into despair, he rose each morning with prayer on his lips and trust in his heart. That is the essence of divine protection, not escape from danger, but endurance within it. To understand the final depth of Psalm 5, one must understand that God's shield is not static. It is alive. It moves with those who move in obedience. It surrounds not the idle believer, but the walking one. The presence of protection intensifies as you continue to walk forward in faith. Standing still in fear does not reveal the shield. Stepping out in trust does. David discovered this in his life's valleys. Every time he obeyed God's command, even when logic opposed it, he found himself preserved. Every time he placed his decisions in the hands of heaven rather than the opinions of men, he saw the schemes of the wicked unravel without his effort. The man who walks in righteousness does not need to chase justice, because justice walks with him. The great challenge for the believer is to maintain that trust when nothing feels secure. The flesh demands evidence. The Spirit demands endurance. The flesh looks for visible results. The Spirit clings to invisible faithfulness. David's cry, "Lead me in your righteousness," is not the request of a man who sees everything clearly. It is the confession of one who walks by faith through fog. He does not ask for explanation, he asks for alignment. He does not beg for ease, he begs for righteousness. That is the sign of maturity. To value guidance over comfort, holiness over happiness, obedience over outcome. The one who prays this way does not merely survive storms, he transcends them. God's shield operates through this paradox. It is most active when you are most uncertain. It shines brightest when you cannot see. It speaks loudest when the world falls silent. Protection is not proven in the absence of conflict, but in the consistency of peace within conflict. When you can rest while others panic, when you can bless while others curse, when you can sing while others scheme, then you are living inside Psalm 5. That is when the wicked plan no longer intimidates you, because you have learned that the presence of enemies only amplifies the presence of God. The believer who understands this becomes untouchable in a way that confuses the world. His life is not free of pain, but pain no longer defines him. He experiences loss, but never loses himself. He faces betrayal, but never becomes bitter. He endures accusation, but never seeks vengeance. This is the kind of soul David became. A man so surrendered that his enemies could attack his body but never reach his heart. That is the victory of the righteous. The shield does not make you invincible in the flesh. It makes you invulnerable in the spirit. To walk in this dimension of divine favor is to live in constant communion with the Almighty. It is to wake each morning aware that your breath is borrowed grace and your path is preordained mercy. It is to know that before you step into the unknown, heaven has already scouted the terrain. It is to understand that no curse can cling to one who walks in covenant. The wicked may gather in secret plotting unseen traps, but they are defeated before they begin. For the moment they conspire, God has already intervened. He rearranges time, redirects people, and reverses plots in silence. The believer rarely sees these rearrangements, yet he reaps their peace. This is why David could say, "In the morning you hear my voice." He was not informing God of his needs, but aligning himself with divine rhythm. The morning symbolizes more than a time of day. It represents awakening. Each new day is a rehearsal of resurrection, light overcoming darkness, purpose overcoming confusion, peace overcoming fear. The morning is when the shield becomes visible again after the shadows of night. Prayer at dawn is not superstition. It is synchronization with divine order. Those who rise early to seek God do not earn favor. They enter it consciously. But this awareness must extend beyond the morning hour. The believer must learn to carry the morning into the afternoon of busyness and the night of uncertainty. The same God who heard you in secret desires to guide you in the crowd. His shield is not limited to the quiet moment of devotion. It remains active in the chaos of life. The whisper that comforted you in prayer becomes the wisdom that guides you in conflict. The peace that met you at dawn becomes the power that carries you through dusk. When you live this way, you become a moving sanctuary, a vessel of divine presence walking through a restless world. And the world will notice, the wicked will sense that something surrounds you they cannot explain. They will try to provoke you, but your calm will confuse them. They will attempt to curse you, but their words will turn into wind. They will plot against you, but every plan will scatter, as if the air itself rejects their schemes. This is not arrogance, it is atmosphere. When the righteous walk under divine favor, their very presence disrupts the operations of evil. You become a walking contradiction to the spirit of this age, a being who lives in peace amidst warfare, who loves amidst hatred, who endures without explanation. That is the heritage of the righteous. That is the legacy of the shield. Yet, walking with this awareness also demands humility. The danger of divine favor is pride. The more God preserves you, the more you must remember that it is His doing, not yours. Favor is not ownership, it is stewardship. You are not the source of protection, you are its witness. David never took credit for his survival. He always returned gratitude to the giver. But let all those that put their trust in you rejoice. Rejoicing is not a suggestion, it is a command of the shielded. It keeps the heart soft and the mind sober. Gratitude keeps the armor polished. Pride corrodes it. Every time you acknowledge God's hand in your preservation, you strengthen your covering. Every time you attribute success to self, you thin the barrier. The life of a believer, then, is a continual balance between warfare and worship. You fight not with hands, but with holiness. You conquer not by might, but by mercy. The world sees peace as passivity, but in truth, peace is power. It is the refusal to let external chaos rewrite internal conviction. Peace is the highest form of strength because it cannot be manipulated. It is the calmness that comes from knowing who commands the battle. The believer who holds peace holds victory long before the battle begins. When the psalm says, "You will bless the righteous," it does not describe an occasional act, it reveals a lifestyle. The blessing of God is not an event, it is an environment. It surrounds the righteous because they have become aligned with His nature. To be blessed is not merely to possess things, it is to possess the awareness that nothing can separate you from His love. It is to live inside grace as fish live in water, completely immersed, completely dependent, and completely sustained. The wicked live outside this environment, gasping for meaning, chasing satisfaction through deceit, but their joy evaporates as quickly as their schemes. The righteous live within the current of divine purpose, and even their tears are sanctified. This is why David could end the psalm not with fear, but with rejoicing. He had learned that the sound of joy is louder than the noise of enemies. Joy is prophetic. It declares victory before it is visible. It is the sound of the shield resounding in worship. When you praise, you align your atmosphere with heaven's authority. The wicked cannot thrive in such an atmosphere. They suffocate in it. The same joy that strengthens the righteous disorients the enemy. That is why Paul and Silas sang in prison, not because they were free, but because they knew freedom was inevitable. Praise releases divine power that breaks unseen chains. It is not emotional expression, it is spiritual legislation. So when the psalm calls you to rejoice, it is not asking you to ignore pain. It is asking you to redefine it. Rejoicing is not denial, it is dominion. It is the act of standing in the middle of suffering and declaring, "This cannot destroy me because I am surrounded." The believer who rejoices in adversity declares war on despair. Joy becomes a spiritual weapon sharper than any sword. It slices through anxiety, depression, and confusion, reminding the soul that God's presence is greater than any pressure. Even now there are unseen battles being fought on your behalf. You do not see them, but you feel their peace. The accidents that never happened, the rumors that died in silence, the betrayals that never reached you, all of these are evidence of Psalm 5 unfolding in your life. You are living proof that divine shields still exist. And though you may never know the full extent of what you have been spared, eternity will reveal it. You will stand before God one day and see how many arrows He intercepted, how many storms He calmed before they touched you, how many nights He stayed awake while you slept. The shield does not rest, it watches. In moments of weakness, when fear whispers that you are alone, remember this: the shield is as close as your next breath. Every prayer reignites it, every act of faith strengthens it, every moment of surrender expands it. The enemy cannot penetrate what he cannot comprehend, and he cannot comprehend peace. When your soul remains anchored in stillness, the devil loses his foothold. He thrives on reaction, he dies in reverence. That is why the psalm calls you not to panic, but to pray. Panic invites confusion, prayer invites command, and command has already been given. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. This is the eternal echo of Psalm 5. The wicked may form weapons, but they cannot finish them. They may start plans, but they cannot sustain them. Evil always collapses under the weight of its own pride. The more it rises, the more unstable it becomes. Pride is gravity to the wicked. It pulls them down as soon as they ascend. But humility is wind to the righteous. It lifts them higher as they bow lower. The humble soul walks beneath the shield. The proud one walks outside it. Therefore, humility must remain your posture. It is not a weakness, it is wisdom. It recognizes dependence not as limitation, but as liberation. When you rely fully on God, you are no longer vulnerable to manipulation. You become ungovernable by fear, unshaken by failure, untouched by vanity. You move with quiet authority, knowing that your defender is divine. You do not need to shout to prove strength. Your peace speaks louder than any argument. That is the dignity of the righteous, the serenity of those who know who fights for them. And though the world may mock such stillness, heaven applauds it. For every time you choose peace over panic, heaven bears witness that faith is alive on earth. Every time you forgive what wounded you, angels record a victory unseen by men. Every time you bless those who curse you, the fragrance of Christ spreads further through the world. You become a living psalm, a continuation of David's song, a vessel through which God's shield becomes visible again. The shield is not just for your protection, it is also for your witness. When others see that you remain unbroken, they begin to wonder about the source of your strength. When they see you walk through storms with serenity, they begin to hunger for the same peace. The shield that covers you becomes a mirror that reflects Him. You become a sermon the world can see, a testimony that no evil can erase. That is how God uses the righteous, to reveal His faithfulness through their endurance. And so the cycle continues. The wicked plot, the righteous pray, and God prevails. History repeats the same melody, but the ending never changes. Evil always exhausts itself, righteousness always endures. Darkness may roar, but dawn always rises. This is the eternal rhythm of divine order. Psalm 5 was written centuries ago, yet it sings the same truth today. God still shields His people, and every wicked plan still scatters before they walk. In the end, the psalm does not leave you with fear of enemies, but with the assurance of favor. You will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround him as with a shield. The shield and the favor are one and the same, the manifest presence of God embracing the believer. To be surrounded by favor means to be inaccessible to despair. It means that no matter where you stand inside love. It means that every breath you take is already guarded by purpose. It means that even when you stumble, grace catches you before guilt can claim you. That is the blessing of the righteous, not perfection, but preservation. And as you carry this truth forward, let it anchor you in every trial. When the night feels endless, remember that the morning still comes. When the enemy speaks loudly, remember that his time is short. When your heart trembles, remember that His heart holds you. Nothing that rises against you can outlast the presence that surrounds you. The shield of God is older than evil and stronger than death. It will not fade, it will not fail, and it will not forget you. So stand firm, child of God. Stand in righteousness, stand in gratitude, stand in peace. Let your life become an echo of this psalm, a living testimony that the plans of darkness will always scatter before the light. Walk boldly into each day, knowing that unseen armies accompany your steps, that mercy precedes you, that grace follows you, and that favor surrounds you like a circle of eternal flame. And if these words spoke to your heart, Strengthening your faith and deepening your trust in the God who shields your steps, take this moment to subscribe to the channel. Walk with us through the word that builds peace, the truth that defeats fear, and the faith that turns every attack into testimony. Because as long as you remain in his presence, every wicked plan will scatter before your walk, and you will never walk alone.